Have you ever said something out loud and at the very moment the words left your mouth, you felt as if you had just lost something that belonged to your inner world, an intention you had not yet had time to nurture, a fear you were not yet strong enough to name, a direction you had only dared to think about silently? The strange thing is that no one actually hurt you, and yet you still felt weakened, as if a portion of your energy had slipped out of your hands simply because you spoke too soon. This is one of the most subtle yet dangerous mistakes of human life, sharing when the inner world is not yet ready, not because the world is cruel, but because your unconscious is not yet stable enough to stand firm in the face of other people's reactions or expectations. There are things which, if spoken too early, will change form, become distorted, or lose their inherent power. And many of us have lost important things simply because of one unconscious sentence. This video does not come to tell you to live closed off, to be secretive, or to distrust everyone. It comes to remind you of a very important truth. The inner world needs to be protected by silence at the right time. There are 4 things, only 4, that a person who has matured inwardly should never reveal, not to hide but to preserve their own full power. And if you are ready, we will begin by looking directly at the very things you should not say. Number 1. Why silence is a mechanism for protecting the inner world. There is a very subtle truth that depth psychology has long emphasized. Most of our psychological wounds do not come from what other people do to us, but from what we ourselves have given away too early. Not everyone understands that every word carries a portion of psychic energy, and every time you speak about something that is just beginning to take shape within you, you are allowing the world to step into a space that should have belonged only to you, and sometimes just one careless reaction from someone else is enough to destabilize an inner structure you have not yet had time to complete. What is strange is that this damage does not arrive immediately. It seeps in slowly like water slipping through a crack in stone until one day you realize that you can no longer feel the original impulse at all, simply because someone touched it too soon. Silence, from a depth psychology perspective, is not a lack of communication or a form of passivity. Silence is a withdrawal of projection, the act of reclaiming psychic energy that has too easily flowed outward. Human beings constantly project the contents of the unconscious onto the world, onto people, onto relationships, onto the future, and even onto aspects of themselves they do not yet understand. But when you know how to remain silent, you stop projecting. You bring the energy back, gather it, and hold it within like a current that is being restored. And it is precisely during this phase that the inner world gains the opportunity to reorganize itself. As one great thinker once said, in each of us there is another whom we do not know. And when you give that unknown part enough space, it will realign everything in a way that the intellect can hardly interfere with. When you are no longer pulled toward other people's reactions, glances, or unconscious expectations, your mind begins to operate according to its true rhythm. A rhythm that is slower, deeper, and more precise. The reality is this: all the most subtle processes within a human being, growth, healing, awakening, take place in silence. Not because the world is toxic, but because every inner movement requires an environment that is not invaded by incompatible energies. I once knew a friend named Lena who loved to share every emotion she was experiencing. When she began meditating, she told all her friends. When she wanted to change jobs, she told the entire office. When she was healing from a relationship, she brought every step and every thought out to sea. Advice. Ironically, the more she talked, the more lost she became. The more she explained, the less certain she felt. And eventually she realized that she could no longer distinguish between her own voice and the echo of others. One day she said something I have never forgotten. Maybe the only thing I need to do is not to share more, but to stay silent long enough to hear myself. And interestingly, when she began to do that, what had once been chaotic became very clear, as if her inner world simply needed space to place each piece back where it belonged. This is the psychological mechanism at work. When you speak too much, you hand over the authority to interpret yourself to the world. When you are silent, you reclaim that power. That silence does not make you smaller. It makes you more whole. It helps you realize that many things you thought required advice actually only needed peace in order to become clear. In practice, you can observe this in the most successful people. They are not always silent because of secrecy, but because they understand the power of keeping energy within until it ripens. Anything that is being born within you, an idea, a new belief, a direction, A healing process needs to be nourished by silence. Growth that is rushed is fragile, but growth that happens in silence is resilient. One metaphor from depth psychology that is particularly powerful is that of the potter. New thoughts and new changes are like a vessel being shaped. If you touch it too much, it becomes distorted. If others touch it, it breaks. It only becomes complete when it is left alone. Silence is that leaving it alone, a space in which no one interferes with the process unfolding inside you. Only in stillness does the true shape of the vessel emerge. You may have experienced telling someone about something you deeply cherished, only to have one careless remark drain your enthusiasm, your faith, or even your trust in yourself, not because they were malicious, but because they could not understand the level at which your inner process was taking place. Each person operates from their own frame of reference. What is germinating within you belongs to yours. When two frames of reference collide too early, emotions become distorted and perception is misdirected. You think you are being hurt, but in truth you are simply being pulled away from your center. Therefore, silence is not about hiding. Silence is about preservation, not about separating from the world, but about ensuring that what belongs to you ripens at your own rhythm. Silence is a form of self-respect, a form of self-care, a form of honoring what is growing within you. And when you understand this mechanism, you will see why there are things that should not be spoken. Not because they are secrets, but because speaking too early means handing your inner authority over to someone else. Number 2, do not share your plans and goals. And once you understand why silence is a mechanism for protection, the inner world, you will notice an even more subtle truth. Some things are not ruined by other people, but by the very act of speaking them too soon. One of these is your plans and goals. On a deep psychological level, this is not merely about not showing off, but about libido, life energy, and how it becomes dispersed by a single careless sentence. Not everyone realizes that plans in their earliest stages are like fragile streams of energy searching for a direction to flow. And the moment too many eyes are cast upon them, that flow immediately changes course, or worse, dries up. Libido is not merely motivation or desire. It is the operating foundation of the entire process of individuation, the gradual becoming of who you truly are. But libido grows stronger only when it is held within, when it has space to move inward rather than being pulled outward by social feedback. As one perspective in depth psychology puts it, the creation of something new is not accomplished by the eye, intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. No desire survives long when it is brought out for exchange too early. Desire grows in silence when it is nourished by focus and the privacy of your inner life. Try to remember the last time you shared an important plan with someone. When you spoke, you felt as if you had already completed part of the work. This is a psychological illusion known as the release of energy through speech. It makes you believe you have progressed when in reality you have just reduced your drive to act. If others praise you, you feel excited. If they doubt you, you feel discouraged. But both reactions drain the libido that should have been used to begin. For the unconscious, every time you speak, you discharge energy instead of accumulating it. A viewer of the channel named Aaron once shared that he was always highly creative, but never actually finished anything. Whenever he had a new idea, he immediately told a few close friends, hoping for feedback. But the more he talked, the more excited he became by their reactions, while in reality he did nothing. When the initial excitement faded, his motivation disappeared as well. Once I asked him, "Why don't you try doing it first and then talk about it?" He laughed, a little embarrassed. "Because every time I talk about it, I feel like I've already done half of it." And that was exactly it. He had spent all his libido on words instead of action. What should have been nurtured within was burned up in immediate validation. Viewed through a psychological metaphor, your plan is like a seed without a protective shell. It is soft, moist, fragile, and needs darkness so that roots can form before it reaches upward. Too much sunlight, the gaze of others, does not nourish it. It dries it out. A harsh criticism can break it. Praise too early can make it swell and then wither. A seed does not need an audience. It needs soil. And your plan does not need encouragement. It needs libido. What causes many people to lose their goals is not difficulty, but the dispersion of energy. Each time you speak, you are not just saying a sentence. You are transferring part of your directional authority to others. They may worry on your behalf, project their fears onto you, or doubt your abilities. And even if they do not intend to discourage you, your unconscious still receives these influences as resistance. Your ego begins to waver, compare, question itself, and defend. And after a short time, you are no longer sure whether that goal truly belongs to you or if it is merely something you once said out loud. The most dangerous aspect here is the distortion of motivation. What should arise from your true self, the desire to grow, change and move forward, is replaced by the need to prove, explain or please others. You act because you do not want to lose face. And when you act for that reason, exhaustion comes quickly. And when you remain silent, something remarkable happens. Libido moving. Ease inward. Discipline begins to form not from willpower but from the force of energy being directed correctly. You do not need encouragement, do not need others to know, do not need applause. Silent progress brings a very different kind of confidence, the confidence of someone who knows they are keeping a promise to themselves. This kind of confidence is not easily shaken because it does not depend on the gaze of others. At a certain point, when the energy is strong enough, you will naturally share without fear of being influenced, not to show off, but because you know you have gone far enough not to be pulled off course. This is the moment you enter individuation, the process in which a person begins to operate from their true self rather than from social feedback. That is why among the 4 things that should never be revealed to anyone, plans and goals stand at the top. Not because the world is toxic or others intend to sabotage you, but because what you are nurturing needs in in order to grow. And when you understand this mechanism, you will naturally feel that keeping your plans to yourself is not a defense but a form of respect for the path you are walking. Number 3. Do not share your fears, insecurities, and weaknesses. And after seeing why plans need silence in order to grow, have you ever asked yourself, what about things that are softer, more fragile fears, insecurities, and hidden wounds? Should they be spoken? From the perspective of depth psychology, the answer is always far more complex than we imagine, because fear is not merely a passing emotion, it is part of the shadow. And not everyone in your life has the capacity to hold, understand, or support that shadow safely. It was once written that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. This statement appears to address awareness, but its implication is far deeper. The shadow can only be healed in the right end. Environment with people who have sufficient depth, or within the silence you create for yourself. If you place your shadow in the wrong hands, they cannot lift it. Instead, they unconsciously distort it, project onto it, or make it heavier in your mind. One of the most common misconceptions of modern times is the belief that openness means sharing everything. But in the view of depth psychology, understanding the shadow does not mean exposing it. A wound does not heal faster simply because it is brought into the light of too many eyes. Sometimes it becomes even more contaminated because the other person lacks the capacity to hold that fragile part. What you believe is venting can sometimes be the act of handing your most vulnerable part to someone who does not have the tools to keep it safe. I once knew a woman named Mira who carried a persistent insecurity that she was never good enough. Whenever anxiety arose, she turned to a coworker who tended to panic on her behalf. When Mira saw she feared being judged, the other person immediately reflected it back. Yes, that's true, the bosses are very demanding. When Mira confessed she felt unstable, the other replied, I also think you're always too tense. Within a few weeks, fears that had once been vague feelings became absolute truths in her mind, not because they were accurate, but because they were amplified through someone else who was also operating from an unintegrated shadow. This happens due to a simple psychological mechanism. When you reveal your fears to someone who is not inwardly mature, they cannot contain them. They project their own fears onto you, and then you carry not only your own shadow but theirs as well. You do not feel lighter. You feel twice as heavy. In Greek mythology, there is the story of Pandora. She opened the box not out of malice but out of natural human curiosity. What made the box dangerous was not its contents but the fact that it was opened when humanity was not yet capable of containing what was inside. Misfortune poured out simply because it was opened at the wrong time. This is a precise metaphor for the shadow. The shadow itself is not dangerous. Opening it to the wrong person at the wrong moment is what causes you to lose control. When you reveal your fears to someone without sufficient depth, it is they, not you, who interpret, project, and amplify them. You lose not only inner stability, but also authority over your own darkness. Fear is a part of the soul, not something to present, but something to dialogue with. When you speak too soon, the ego immediately seeks reassurance from outside, creating a cycle of dependence. The more insecure you feel, the more validation you need, the more validation you seek, the more inner authority you lose. You believe you are relieving yourself, but in reality, you are teaching the ego that fear is only safe when others permit it. This prevents the shadow from being integrated and pushes it further from your inter. That is why depth psychology always encourages observing fear in silence before speaking about it. When you stay with it, listen to it, write it down, and look at it without running away, you are doing something profoundly important. You are integrating the shadow instead of handing it over to the world. Inner strength does not come from having no fear, but from the ability to sit beside it without witnesses. This form of courage is entirely different from the indiscriminate sharing so commonly seen. There you speak simply to unload emotion. Here you stay to understand the message the fear carries, and that message is always meaningful. Fear never comes to defeat you. It comes to show you where you have not yet matured. Those who fear abandonment may discover they need to learn how to stand on their own. Those who fear failure may see an ego still dependent on perfection. And when you face these truths yourself, no one can distort their meaning. And when you understand this, you will realize that there are fears you should never share with anyone, not because of shame or concealment, but because this is sacred work between you and your shadow. Holding them back is not about avoidance, but about understanding more deeply, becoming stronger, and moving forward into the next stage of the journey with a wholeness that no one can take from you. Number 4. Do not talk about what you no longer want to pursue. There is a third type of information that you should also not rush to reveal to anyone: the things you no longer want to pursue. It sounds simple, but from the perspective of depth psychology, this is in fact one of the most sensitive and delicate phases of the entire psychological process. When you no longer want to continue down a certain path, that is not failure or giving up. It is the moment when libido life energy begins to withdraw from the old direction in order to prepare for the formation of a new cycle. If you reveal this too early, you not only slow this process down, but you may also be pulled back to the very place you are trying to leave. Acceptance is sometimes not an admission to others. It is a silent agreement between you and your true self. When you speak out about what you no longer want to pursue, you unintentionally open the door for the world to step in and redefine that decision. Other people cannot see your inner process. They only see the old version of you they are familiar with. And because human beings tend to feel safe when others remain in the roles they have assigned to them, they will advise you to go back, keep you standing still, or unconsciously make you doubt your own inner voice. I once knew the story of a man named Daniel who worked as a software engineer for 8 years. He was good at his job, earned a solid income, and appeared to be moving in the right direction by social standards. But deep inside, he felt his energy gradually draining away. He no longer felt alive in that work. He was merely operating on inertia. One evening, Daniel tried to share with a close friend that he wanted to shift into content creation. The immediate response was, "Are you crazy? Your job is stable. Why would you quit?" Just one sentence, seemingly caring, threw Daniel into confusion. He forced himself to hold on for another year to prove to everyone that he was not unstable. The result was burnout, discouragement, and eventually a complete stop. What he regretted most was not the lost time, but the feeling of being pulled away from his deepest inner voice simply because he had spoken too soon. This happens because when libido is withdrawing from an old direction, it is extremely fragile. A single objection can be enough to pull psychic energy back into an old role, even though you know inside that the journey has expired. Speaking out does not make you clearer. It forces you to deal with other people's expectations, fears, judgments, and need for control, things that have nothing to do with the path your soul is calling you toward. An image can help clarify this. Imagine you are climbing a mountain and realize that the path you are on no longer leads where you want to go. The natural instinct is to change direction. But if you shout out that you are about to change paths, others standing from their own vantage point will say that the current path still seems fine. They cannot see the rock about to fall ahead of you. They cannot hear your intuition. And if you listen to them even a little, you will hesitate and stop right where you no longer belong. Neuroscience also points to this. When the brain prepares to leave behind an old belief or goal, It enters a state of restructuring in which the prefrontal cortex needs quiet to create a new pathway. If you receive feedback during this phase, the amygdala, the fear center, is immediately activated, causing you to revert to the old choice because it feels safer. Just one question like, "Are you sure?" is enough to make the brain IN back toward the path you are trying to leave. Silence in moments when you no longer want to pursue something is not concealment. It is protection of your own transformation process. Libido needs enclosure in order to complete its withdrawal and reorganization. If you speak too early, that energy has not yet switched circuits before being pulled outward to deal with social reactions. And not everyone is ready to witness you changing. When you step out of an old role, others lose predictability. Their reactions say nothing about your path, but only reflect their own fears. The most important psychological movements take place in silence. There are things you need to let go of without announcing them. There are chapters you close without needing an exclamation mark. What you no longer want to pursue is not a subject for discussion. It is a whisper between you and your true self. When you remain silent, you allow change to unfold fully without interference from voices that do not belong. To your journey. And most importantly, not everything you leave behind needs an explanation. Sometimes silence is respect for the old version that has completed its task, and also a gift to the new version preparing to be born. Holding back what you no longer want to pursue is not a lack of courage. It is an understanding that transformation is an inner ritual, private, sacred, and not open to interference. Number 5. Do not talk about your achievements, money, or success. And it is precisely from the subtlety of this process that you will recognize another form of silence that is even more important. Silence around achievements, money, and what you have accomplished. If the previous section addressed what you no longer want to pursue, this one touches the opposite, what you have reached, built, and achieved, yet should not rush to speak about. This may sound strange because we often believe that joy should be shared, success should be recognized, and results should be displayed as a reward. But from the perspective of depth psychology, success does not belong to the persona, the social mask we use to appear in the world, but to the self, the deepest, quietest, and truest part of the soul. And anything that belongs to the self needs protection. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Success, whether financial, professional, or inner, is part of the journey of becoming yourself. And precisely because it is so important, it cannot be placed in other people's hands, nor pulled into comparisons, judgments, or expectations you do not control. When you talk about success, you are not just sharing information. You are opening a door for others to interpret you through their own frame of reference. And that frame is always colored by comparison, unconscious envy, or expectations they unknowingly project onto you. A friend of mine worked tirelessly to build her career from nothing. When she bought her first home, she excitedly shared the news with a group of friends. Their response was not congratulations, but half-joking remarks. "So, you're rich now. Someone must have helped you. Let's see if you can keep it." These comments were not malicious, but they planted a strange feeling in her heart. Her success suddenly felt heavy. She began to feel pressure to keep proving herself, to keep achieving something in response to those invisible expectations. A moment that should have belonged to joy became tinged with energy she had never invited in. Success spoken too early is easily pulled out of your inner frame of reference and placed into a social one where people do not see your effort, do not feel the journey you have walked, and only react to the surface through instinct. And it is here that the persona becomes endangered. The persona is meant to help us live in society. When it is tied to success, it becomes most fragile. Every compliment makes you want to maintain that image. Every envious glance makes you waver. And every external expectation pulls you away from your true rhythm. Success revealed too early is like a small flame carried out into the wind. Before it has time to grow, it is shaken by gusts of comparison and envy. But when you remain silent, the flame burns in a closed, warm, safe space until it is strong enough that nothing can extinguish it. This is why inwardly mature people tend to be discreet about their achievements. They do not hide, but they do not display either. They understand that anything connected to deep personal growth requires privacy to preserve its strength. When you talk too much about success, you unconsciously turn it into an object for others to react to. And those reactions, positive or negative, pull you away from your state of deep focus. Praise can lead you to perform in order to maintain an image. Skepticism can make you feel the need to prove yourself. Subtle envy can make you shrink so as not to make others uncomfortable. And within days, the pure joy of achievement turns into a psychological burden you never wanted. Psychological science also shows that when you publicize success too early or too often, the brain shifts from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic validation, meaning you begin to seek approval instead of inner satisfaction. This disrupts your next direction of growth because you are no longer listening to the self but to the market, society, and other people. And the paradox is, the more you speak, the harder it becomes to maintain your original creative rhythm. There is something very beautiful about people who are quiet about their achievements. They let results speak for themselves. They do not force belief nor try to prove their worth. They simply do the work and let truth stand on its own. True success does not need bright lights. It illuminates itself through its quality. And when you understand this, you will see that among the 4 things you should not reveal, achievements, money, and success are the easiest ways to leak energy, not because they are dangerous, but because they easily activate the persona. Once the persona takes over, you lose connection with the self, the place where peace and true direction are preserved. What is built in silence lasts longer. Success does not need to be explained. It only needs to be lived. And when you allow it to grow in private space, you will see it develop naturally, safely, and in a way that is true to you, not to the world. Number 6. When you no longer need to reveal, and when you understand why there are things that should not be spoken, from plans, fears, what you no longer wish to pursue, to achievements themselves, you will gradually notice a deeper layer of silence, a state that is not maintained by effort, but by the absence of any need to speak. Here silence is no longer a protective strategy. It becomes the natural state of those who have moved closer to the self, the deepest and most complete center of the soul. When a person lives from the CLF, they do not need to explain to be understood or justify to be accepted. They return to the simplest form of being human, presence. The self is our life's goal, for it is the complete expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. When a person touches this point even briefly, the need to prove anything disappears, not because they withdraw from the world, but because they have found an inner ground stable enough to require no validation. Everything they once felt the urge to share becomes a silent movement within, like a river that grows calmest at its deepest point. This state can be seen in public figures who have lived through enough upheaval to realize that speaking less allows them to live more truthfully. A clear example is Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood actor associated with The Matrix and John Wick. What makes him remarkable is not only his success, but how he has endured profound losses, from the death of loved ones to years of solitude without seeking sympathy. In many interviews, people are struck by how little he speaks about his private life. Yet that silence is not defensive. It reflects someone who no longer needs words to affirm his existence. He is present rather than explanatory. And that presence is felt more clearly than any explanation could convey. There is a beautiful metaphor for this stage. The blacksmith heats metal in a forge. When the fire is small, it crackles loudly. But when the furnace reaches its highest temperature, it becomes silent. That silence does not signal a lack of power. It is the expression of power that has stabilized. A person living from the self is the same. The deeper they go, the quieter they become, the less they feel the need to speak. Yet their presence becomes stronger than any words. Unlike the earlier stage of the journey where silence is needed for protection, this stage is silence for living. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you no longer need to be understood correctly. You no longer fear judgment because your value no longer depends on words or identities assigned by others. When living from the self, you realize that you, not the story you tell, are what matters most. Interestingly, when you enter this state, others sense the change without you saying anything. Your calmness stops their questions. The consistency of your energy makes analysis unnecessary, and your silence no longer creates distance. It creates gravity. Others are drawn to you because you do not try to attract. They feel safe because you do not need their validation. They respect you because you respect your inner space. Modern psychology confirms this from another angle. When people move beyond the need for approval or validation, the brain shifts into a more regulated state, reducing amygdala activity and increasing prefrontal cortex engagement, allowing clearer decisions and less inner conflict. This is the state known as integration, the harmony between consciousness and the unconscious. And at this stage of integration, not revealing no longer feels like effort. It becomes instinct. You do not share plans because your mind is focused. You do not share fears because you are dialoguing with them directly. You do not share what you are leaving behind because you are turning quietly. You do not share success because you are living it rather than proving it. You do not speak not because you hide, but because you have become whole enough to no longer require words for explanation. When a person lives from the self, they discover a simple truth. No one needs to know much about you in order to love you properly, and you do not need to say much to live your life truthfully. Your clarity does not lie in words, but in the state you carry when you enter a room. The self radiates through your gaze, your stillness, your presence, not through the stories you tell about yourself. And this is the end point of the entire journey. Silence ultimately is not something you do. Silence is something you become. It is not a skill but a sign of psychological maturity, not a limitation but freedom. When you no longer need to reveal, you step into a form of living regarded as the ultimate aim of human life, living as a whole being, unmoved by the expectations or reactions of the world. A quiet yet immensely powerful state where what matters most is not what you say, but who you have become. When you pass through this journey, you will realize a simple truth. Strength has never resided in what you say, but in the ability to listen to yourself in a world that constantly demands your voice. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a state of maturity where you are grounded enough not to be pulled off course by others' expectations or reactions. By holding back those four things, you are not only protecting your energy, you are giving yourself the opportunity to grow according to the natural rhythm of the soul. And if silence gives any gift at all, it is the ability to bring you closer to your true self without haste, without display, without being led by external eyes. It is a form of presence that makes others feel your depth without requiring any explanation. If this video helps you understand the power of protecting your inner world, please subscribe to the channel, share the video, and allow others the chance to step into a quiet yet deeply transformative journey of maturity as well. See you in the next videos where we continue opening doors into the deep inner world within ourselves.